There are rooms not sealed by locks or bolts, but closed off by silence, guilt, and things that were never allowed to be finished. They say that if you step into a sealed room and smell incense when no one has lit it, then you may not be the first one inside, and you may also be the next one who has to keep breathing for someone else. Chapter 1. The Room Without Windows. The wooden house stood at the far edge of Chiang Mai's northern outskirts, hidden behind a row of ancient mango trees whose roots had cracked the soil like old scars. Locals said the house had once been a resting place for dam workers more than 30 years ago. No one mentioned why it was abandoned. No one asked. When Crit arrived, the house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against the ears, as if sound itself had learned not to exist there. The landlord, an elderly woman with clouded eyes, handed him the key without ceremony. "The last room at the end of the hallway," she said softly. Her fingers trembled when the key changed hands. The room was small, square, claustrophobic, and strangely, it had no windows. The walls were thick, layered with old paint that smelled faintly of damp wood and age. The ceiling hung low, making the air feel heavy, as though it had not moved in years. There was only one way in and one way out, the door behind him. That night, at exactly 1:17 a.m., Crit woke up for no clear reason. The air had changed. A smell drifted through the darkness, incense. Not the sharp, clean scent of freshly lit sticks, but something older, stale, humid, the kind of incense smell that lingers after funerals, soaked into fabric and memory. It clung to his throat when he breathed in, coating his lungs with a quiet dread. Crit sat up, heart pounding. He did not own incense. There was no altar, no shrine, no ashes. He turned on the light. The room looked exactly the same. No smoke, no burning sticks, no trace of fire. Yet the smell grew stronger, thick enough to feel tangible, as if it had weight. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath his feet. When Crit opened the door and stepped into the hallway, the smell vanished instantly, swallowed by the empty air outside. But the moment he closed the door behind him, the incense returned, stronger, closer, as though the room itself had been waiting for him to breathe again. That night, Crit dreamed of a woman dressed in white, kneeling in the center of the room. Her back was turned to him. She held incense sticks between her fingers, but she had no hands, and the incense was burning anyway. Chapter 2. The Incense with No Source. Crit did not sleep again that night. He sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, the light left on, his eyes fixed on the corners of the room as if something might step out from them at any moment. The smell of incense faded with the morning air, but it did not leave completely. It lingered in the back of his throat, faint and bitter, like a memory refusing to be forgotten. At sunrise, he searched the room again, slowly, carefully. He checked under the bed, inside the wardrobe, behind the door, along the cracks in the walls. Nothing. No incense sticks. No ashes. No hidden altar. Yet when he closed the door and stood alone in the center of the room, he could swear the smell was still there, barely noticeable, but alive, watching him. Later that morning, Crit went outside and asked the neighbors. Most avoided the question, a few shook their heads too quickly, as if afraid that speaking about the room might invite something to follow them home. "No one burns incense here," one man finally muttered, "especially not in that room." That afternoon, Crit returned to the house. The hallway felt longer than before, darker. The air seemed thicker near the end, as if it resisted his steps. When he opened the door to his room, the smell hit him instantly. Stronger than the night before. It was not drifting this time. It was settled, as though it had always belonged there. Crit's chest tightened. His heart began to race. He backed out into the hallway again. Gone. The smell disappeared the moment he crossed the threshold. He stood there for a long time, opening and closing the door, testing the boundary like a wound that refused to heal. Inside, incense. Outside, nothing. That night, he tried sleeping with the door slightly open. At 1:17 a.m., the smell crept toward him anyway. Slow, patient. It did not rush. It did not need to. Crit began to feel something else then, not fear, but a strange pressure, as if the room was being occupied by an unseen presence that required acknowledgement. His ears rang softly, his skin prickled, the air grew warm, heavy with a sense of mourning. He whispered into the darkness, unsure why. Is someone there? The smell intensified. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of something rubbing softly against the floor, like ash being dragged by invisible fingers. Crit pulled the blanket over his head and squeezed his eyes shut. In his sleep, he dreamed again. This time, the woman in white was closer. She knelt in the same place, her head bowed low, the incense burned without flame, smoke curling upward from nothing at all. When she finally spoke, her voice did not come from her mouth. It came from the room itself. Why won't you let me finish? Crit woke up choking on the smell of incense, and the certainty that whatever haunted the room was not trying to scare him. It was waiting.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 3. The landlord WHO would not look inside. Morning arrived without relief. Sunlight crept into the hallway, but it stopped short of Crit's door, as if the room itself rejected it. The smell of incense had faded again, leaving behind only a dull ache in his head and the lingering sense that something unfinished remained in the air. Crit went to find the landlord. She sat on the wooden porch, sorting beetle leaves with slow, deliberate movements. Her back was hunched, her gray hair pulled tight behind her head. When she heard his footsteps, she stiffened slightly, just enough for him to notice. There's something wrong with the room, Crit said. She did not look up. There's a smell, he continued. Incense, every night. Her hands stopped moving. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cicadas screamed in the distance, filling the silence too eagerly, as if they were trying to drown something out. Finally, the old woman sighed. That house is old, she said. Old houses remember things. Crit felt a chill crawl up his spine. Does anyone burn incense in that room? Her fingers tightened around the leaves. Slowly, painfully slowly, she raised her head. But she did not meet his eyes. No, she said, no one burns incense there. Then why do I smell it? Crit pressed. The old woman stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood. She walked past him without another word, heading toward the hallway. Crit followed, his heartbeat loud in his ears. She stopped several steps away from his door. And then she stopped completely. She did not come any closer. I clean every room myself, she said, staring at the floor. But that one, her voice faltered, I only clean it in the morning. Crit frowned. Why not at night? The old woman swallowed. Because at night, she said, the room is already occupied. Crit felt his mouth go dry. By who? She shook her head sharply, as if trying to dislodge the question itself. Do not light any incense, she warned. Do not pray, do not call out, and whatever you do, do not turn off the lights at night. But last night you told me not to turn them on, Crit said. Her breathing became shallow. For the first time, she glanced toward the door, just for a second. That was before it noticed you, she whispered. Before Crit could ask what she meant, the smell returned. Not from the room. From behind him. The incense crept into the hallway, thin but unmistakable. The old woman froze, her face drained of color. It's early, she murmured. It's not supposed to be early. She backed away, retreating step by step, never once lifting her eyes toward the door. Move out, she said suddenly. Leave today. Crit turned to look at the door. For a brief moment, he thought he saw something dark seep through the cracks, like smoke without fire. Breathing softly. When he turned back, the old woman was gone. And from inside the room, something shifted, as if whatever had been waiting was finally adjusting to his presence. Chapter 4. The Night Without Light. Crit did not leave. He told himself it was pride, or stubbornness, or the simple fact that daylight made the room seem harmless again. In the morning, it was just a small, poorly ventilated space with peeling paint and a faint smell of old wood. Nothing more. Nothing that could explain the way his hands still trembled. That evening, he remembered the landlord's warning. "Do not turn off the lights at night." But the words contradicted what she had said before. And contradictions, Crit reasoned, belonged to fear, not truth. At exactly 10 o'clock, he turned off the light. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. Not the gentle dark of sleep, but a thick, suffocating black that pressed against his eyes. Without windows, there was no moonlight, no passing glow from outside. The room felt sealed shut, like a box buried underground. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, the smell returned. Incense. It seeped into the darkness. Heavier than before. It no longer hovered at a distance, it surrounded him. Clung to his hair, his clothes, his skin. Each breath felt borrowed, as though the air no longer belonged to him. Crit sat frozen on the bed, counting his breaths to keep from panicking. 1, 2, 3. With each exhale, the smell deepened. And then he heard it. A soft tap. Not on the door. Not on the walls. On the floor. Another tap followed, then another. Slow, careful, as if someone were kneeling, shifting their weight, pressing their fingers gently against the wood. Crit's heart slammed against his ribs. His throat tightened. The tapping stopped. In the silence, he became painfully aware of something else, movement. The air in front of him stirred, disturbed by something unseen. He could feel it pass close to his face, close enough to raise the fine hairs on his skin. The incense smell spiked sharply. Crit fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on. The room flooded with yellow light. Nothing was there. No marks on the floor. No ash. No shadow. But the smell did not disappear. It hovered stubbornly, thick and accusing, as though turning on the light had angered it rather than banished it. That was when Crit noticed the floor. A faint gray outline had appeared between the bed and the center of the room. Thin, uneven, like the residue left behind after something had been burned and carefully swept away. The shape was unmistakable. 2 knees. A bowed figure. Someone had been kneeling there for a very long time. Crit backed against the wall, his breath coming fast. He realized then what the landlord meant. The room did not need darkness to become occupied. Darkness simply made it easier to feel who was already there. And somewhere within the stale incense-scented air, something exhaled, slowly, patiently, as if relieved that the night had finally been allowed to continue.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 5. The Altar That Could Not Be Seen. Crit spent the rest of the night sitting against the wall, eyes fixed on the faint gray outline on the floor. When morning came, the mark was gone. The floor was clean, too clean. No ash, no dust, no trace of what he had seen the night before. It was as if the room had carefully erased its own evidence. But the smell remained. Not strong, never obvious during the day, but present enough that Crit noticed it whenever he stood still for too long. It crept into his awareness during quiet moments, threading itself through his thoughts like something remembered rather than sensed. That afternoon, he bought cleaning supplies and scrubbed the room from top to bottom. He wiped the walls until his arms ached, mopped the floor twice, even washed the ceiling fan blades, though he had never once turned the fan on. Still, when he stepped back into the center of the room and closed the door, the air shifted. The incense was there. Crit's stomach tightened. He began to understand something then, something deeply unsettling. The smell was not coming from an object. It did not cling to surfaces. It did not linger in corners. It existed in the space itself. That night, instead of sleeping, Crit sat on the bed and observed. He turned off the lights briefly, then turned them back on. He stepped in and out of the room, noting when the smell appeared and when it withdrew. The pattern was clear. The incense only manifested when he was inside. It did not welcome absence. It required a witness. At some point past midnight, the pressure returned, the same heavy, ritual-like stillness that pressed down on his chest. Crit felt compelled to stand. Without quite knowing why, he walked to the exact spot where the kneeling outline had appeared the night before. The moment he stepped there, the smell surged. His vision blurred slightly, not from fear, but from the sensation that he had crossed an invisible boundary. An altar, he realized. Not one made of wood or stone, but of memory, of suffering, of repetition. A place where something had been worshipped not out of faith, but out of desperation. Crit's knees weakened. He had the sudden, irrational urge to kneel, to bow his head, to finish something that had been left undone. He resisted, backing away until his shoulders hit the wall. His heart hammered violently, his breath shallow and fast. "No," he whispered. The room answered, not with a voice, but with absence. The smell thinned, retreating just enough to feel like disappointment. That was worse than anger, because disappointment implied expectation. That night, Crit dreamed not of the woman's face, but of his own reflection, kneeling in the center of the room, incense smoke rising from his mouth with every breath. When he woke, his throat burned, and for the first time, he found gray ash on his lips. Chapter 6. The woman called Sirin. Crit did not tell anyone about the ash on his lips. He washed his mouth until his gums bled, spitting again and again into the sink, watching the water swirl gray before clearing. Even then, the taste lingered, dry, bitter, unmistakably real. That afternoon, he finally asked the neighbors the question he had been avoiding. "Who lived in this room before me?" Most of them turned away immediately. One woman pretended not to hear him. A man across the road crossed himself and muttered a prayer under his breath. It took a long time before someone answered. Her name was Sirin. They spoke it quietly, as if saying it too loudly might invite her closer. Sirin had been a quiet woman, polite, always lowering her head when she passed elders. She rented the room at the end of the hallway years ago, back when the house was still full. Back when people believed the walls were just walls. No one knew exactly what happened at first, only that Sirin stopped coming outside. 7 days passed. Then 7 nights. By the time the landlord forced the door open, the smell was already there. Incense. Thick enough to make grown men gag, heavy enough to cling to clothes and follow them home. Sirin was found kneeling in the center of the room, her body stiff, her lips blackened, her fingers curled as if still holding something that was no longer there. No altar was found. No incense sticks. Only the smell. They said Sirin had been locked inside. By accident, some claimed. By shame, others whispered. No one could agree, and no one wanted to carry the truth for too long. The room was sealed for months after that. When it was finally reopened, the incense never left. That night, Crit lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The room felt different now, not emptier, but fuller, as if knowing her name had given the presence weight, shape, intention. "Sirin," he whispered. The air tightened. The smell bloomed instantly, thick and warm, pressing down on his chest. His breath caught, not from fear, but from the overwhelming sensation of being recognized. The room responded. The pressure gathered at the center, right above the invisible altar. Crit felt it pull at him, tugging gently, insistently, inviting him closer. In his mind, images surfaced unbidden. A woman kneeling. A door that never opened. Incense sticks crushed uselessly in shaking fingers. Sirin had not died praying. She had died waiting to be allowed to finish. Tears welled in Crit's eyes, though he did not understand why. His throat tightened with grief that did not belong to him, mourning that had no clear owner. "I know your name," he whispered hoarsely. The incense softened. For the first time since he moved in, the room felt almost calm. But beneath that calm was something else, something dangerous. Expectation. Because now that Sirin had been named, she was no longer wandering. She was waiting for someone to take her place.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 7. Incense lit by breath. Crit began to notice the change in the most ordinary moments. It happened when he sighed. A long day, a tired body, a slow breath released without thought, and suddenly, the smell of incense thickened, blooming in the air like something newly awakened. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence, stress, imagination, the mind looking for patterns where none existed. Then he tested it. He stood in the center of the room, right where the invisible altar waited. He inhaled deeply through his nose, filling his lungs until his chest ached. Nothing. He held the breath. The room felt tense, suspended, expectant. When he finally exhaled, slowly, carefully, the incense surged. It was immediate, violent in its subtlety. The scent grew warm and dense, wrapping around him, pressing against his face as if something had leaned in close to breathe with him. Crit staggered back, heart racing. "No," he whispered, "that's not possible." But the room did not argue. Every breath after that felt dangerous. Each inhale carried the fear of what the exhale might awaken. He began breathing shallowly, carefully, like someone afraid of making noise in a dark place where noise invited attention. That night, he dreamed he was kneeling. Not Sirin. Himself. His knees pressed into the floor at the center of the room. His back bent forward, his head lowered. With every breath he took, smoke poured from his mouth, not hot, not burning, but endless. The smoke rose and twisted, forming shapes he did not dare to name. When he woke, his chest burned as though he had been holding his breath for too long. The air smelled strongly of incense. Crit rushed to the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, dark shadows ringed them, deep and bruised. When he opened his mouth, a thin wisp of gray drifted out. He slammed his hand over his lips. The room felt pleased. That realization terrified him more than anything else so far. This was not haunting, not possession. It was replacement. Sirin had not been haunting the room. She had been maintaining it. The altar did not function on prayer alone. It required breath, presence, a living body to complete the ritual that death had interrupted. Someone had to keep the incense burning. And now the room had found lungs again. Crit backed toward the door, gasping quietly, afraid to let too much air escape him. His vision blurred at the edges. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the room subtly reshaping itself around him. In the silence, he felt it clearly, hands that did not touch, guiding him back toward the center. Not forcing, inviting, patient. Sirin had waited years. The room could wait longer. But Crit understood one terrible truth now. As long as he stayed, the incense would never go out. Because it was no longer burning on an altar. It was burning inside him. Chapter 8. The mirror that did not reflect. The bathroom mirror had always been there. Small, rectangular, its edges clouded with age, speckled by tiny dark stains that no amount of cleaning had ever removed. Crit had looked into it countless times without thought, until the morning he realized the mirror was no longer behaving like one. It began subtly. When Crit brushed his teeth, his reflection lagged behind, just a fraction of a second too slow. He tilted his head, the image followed, but not precisely. The delay was slight, yet unmistakable, like watching oneself through water. He leaned closer. The smell of incense seeped into the bathroom. "Get it together," he muttered, spitting into the sink. But when he looked up again, the reflection was already staring back at him. Its eyes were open wider than his own. Crit froze. Slowly, carefully, he raised his right hand. The reflection raised its hand too, but not the same one. It lifted the left. A chill swept through his body, cold and sharp. His pulse roared in his ears. He dropped his hand, stumbling back until his shoulders hit the tiled wall. The reflection did not move. It continued to stare at him, head slightly bowed, lips parted just enough for something thin and gray to curl out. Smoke. Not from incense sticks. From the mouth. Crit squeezed his eyes shut and counted to 10. When he opened them again, the mirror showed only him, pale, shaking, terrified. But the smell lingered. That night, the mirror fogged over without steam. Words slowly appeared on its surface, traced from the inside, as though by an unseen finger. Kneel properly. Crit wiped the glass frantically. The letters vanished, but the sensation remained, a weight behind his eyes, a pull at his spine. Later, half asleep, he heard a soft scraping sound. When he turned toward the bathroom, he saw movement in the mirror, his reflection kneeling, head bowed, even though he himself lay frozen in bed. The reflection inhaled. Smoke poured out. Crit screamed and turned on the light. The mirror was empty. But his lungs burned as if he had just exhaled something that did not belong to him. From that night on, Crit avoided mirrors. He washed his face with his eyes closed. He covered reflective surfaces with cloth. Still, he felt watched, not by Sirin, but by a version of himself that understood the rules of the room better than he did. The mirror was no longer showing what was. It was showing what would remain. And in that reflection, Crit never stood. He only knelt.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 9. The Night of Unattended Offerings. The 15th night of the 7th lunar month arrived without ceremony. There were no lanterns hung in front of the house. No offerings placed at the gate. No monks chanting in the distance. The neighbors kept their doors shut, their windows dark, as if the village itself had decided to hold its breath. Crit felt it before the sun went down. The room grew restless. The air thickened early, heavy with a sweetness that turned bitter at the back of his tongue. Incense, far stronger than before, crept through the cracks in the walls, spilling into the hallway for the first time since he had moved in. By nightfall, the entire house smelled like a funeral no one had attended. Crit stood at the threshold of his room, afraid to step inside, afraid not to. The invisible altar pulsed faintly at the center, a pressure he could feel even with his eyes closed. He had the overwhelming sense that tonight was important. That something had been scheduled. At exactly 1:17 a.m., the smell peaked. It was no longer drifting. It was burning. Crit's chest tightened as his breathing grew shallow. With every reluctant exhale, smoke seeped into the air, thin, gray, unmistakable. It gathered above the altar space, curling upward in disciplined spirals, as if following a ritual pattern long memorized. The room did not need him to kneel tonight. It already knew how. From the hallway came faint sounds, soft shuffling, bare feet brushing against wood, pauses filled with reverent stillness. Doors that had not been opened in years creaked faintly, not wide enough to pass through, only enough to acknowledge presence. Crit pressed his back against the wall, hands shaking. He understood then. This was not Sirin's night alone. This was the night of the forgotten. The dead who had never been named. The prayers that had never been finished. The incense that had never been allowed to burn down. They came quietly, respectfully, filling the house without bodies, without faces. The air grew crowded, heavy with expectation. Crit felt eyes on him, not hostile, not cruel, but desperate. They were waiting for the incense to be kept alive. Waiting for breath. His lungs ached, his vision blurred at the edges. The pressure at the center of the room intensified, urging him forward, not violently, but insistently, like hands guiding someone who already knew where to go. In the haze of smoke, he saw Sirin, not as she had appeared in his dreams. She stood upright now, whole, her white clothing unwrinkled, her expression calm. She did not look at him. She looked past him, toward the altar. And then she stepped aside, making room. The smell of incense surged one final time, thick enough to choke on. Crit realized, with a clarity that felt like surrender, that tonight was never meant to end with prayers completed. It was meant to continue. And in a house full of silent dead, only one living body remained capable of breathing for them. Chapter 10. The night we tried to interfere. Crit did not plan to survive the night. That realization came to him calmly, with a clarity that felt almost merciful. If he stayed and continued breathing, the ritual would go on. If he ran, it would follow him, or worse, find someone else. So he decided to stop it. Before midnight, Crit went to the market and bought incense sticks, candles, flowers, everything one would need to perform a proper offering. The vendor did not ask questions. She only looked at him for a long time before slipping an extra bundle of incense into his bag. For balance, she said quietly. Back in the room, Crit arranged the offerings where the invisible altar waited. He lit the candles first. The flames flickered weakly, bending inward, as if drawn toward something they could not touch. Then he lit the incense. For the first time since moving in, smoke rose from a visible source. The room reacted instantly. The air shuddered, the pressure intensified violently, slamming into Crit's chest hard enough to steal his breath. The smell of the room's incense clashed with the new smoke, creating a choking, sour stench that burned his eyes. "This isn't how it's done," something whispered. The voice did not come from Sirin. It came from everywhere. The flames guttered wildly. One candle went out, then another. The incense sticks cracked, ash falling in unnatural clumps onto the floor. Crit fell to his knees, coughing, gasping for air. "I'm finishing it," he rasped. "You don't need me anymore." The pressure grew unbearable. The walls creaked, the ceiling groaned, dust drifting down like old bones. In the chaos, Crit saw figures, shadows pressed into smoke, crowding the room, their shapes incomplete. Hands reached out, not to grab him, but to steady the altar. To correct him. The smoke pouring from his mouth thickened, overpowering the incense sticks he had lit. The visible flames died one by one, replaced by the steady, relentless burning of breath. Sirin appeared again, closer than ever. Her eyes were no longer empty. They were tired. She knelt beside him, her form flickering. "You cannot replace us with fire," she said softly. "Fire ends." Her gaze dropped to his chest. "Breath continues." The incense sticks in his hands crumbled to dust. The room exhaled as one. Crit collapsed forward, his forehead touching the floor at the center of the invisible altar. His lungs burned, his vision swimming. He felt something settle, a line click into place. The ritual did not resist him anymore. It accepted him. And in that acceptance, Crit understood the final cruelty of the room. The incense was never meant to be lit once. It was meant to be kept alive.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 11. The Confession That Should Not Be Spoken. The confession did not come from the dead. It came from the living. The morning after the failed ritual, Crit woke on the floor, his body aching as if he had knelt for days. The room was quiet, too quiet. The smell of incense was faint but steady, like an ember refusing to die. He left the room for the first time without fear and found the landlord sitting alone in the courtyard. Her hands empty, her eyes hollow. She did not look surprised to see him. "I knew you would hear it eventually," she said. "Hear what?" Crit asked. She laughed softly, a sound without humor. "The room always tells." Her shoulders sagged, as if something heavy had finally been allowed to rest. "Sirin was my daughter." The words hung in the air, fragile and poisonous. She was not sick, she was not mad, she was inconvenient. The landlord's voice trembled as she spoke. Sirin had fallen in love with a married man. When the village found out, shame spread faster than truth. The house became a cage. The room without windows became a solution. "I told myself it was temporary," the old woman whispered, "just until people stopped talking. 7 days. 7 nights. I brought her food, water. I prayed outside the door." Her hands clenched into fists. "But I never opened it. Not once." When Sirin stopped answering, the landlord waited another day. Then another. "I was afraid," she said, "of what I would find. Of what I had already done." When the door was finally opened, Sirin was kneeling, waiting. Her incense sticks lay broken in her lap, unlit. "I couldn't light them," the landlord said, tears streaming down her face. "If I did, I would have admitted she was gone." So she sealed the room. She let the incense burn anyway. In silence. In breath. Crit felt the truth settle into his bones. Sirin had not become part of a ritual by choice. She had been assigned. The landlord bowed deeply, her forehead touching the ground. "The room took her because I would not." The incense smell thickened slightly. Not angry, acknowledging. That night, Crit returned to the room knowing something had changed. The truth had been spoken. And truth, like incense, could not be unbreathed. Chapter 12. The monk Who could not look. The monk arrived just before dusk. He was old, older than the landlord. His robe faded from years of sun and incense smoke. When he stepped into the courtyard, the cicadas fell silent, as if even the insects recognized his presence. He did not ask to see the room. He already knew where it was. When Crit led him down the hallway, the monk stopped several steps before the door. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. "I cannot look inside," he said calmly. Crit felt his stomach twist. "Why?" "Because it is not empty," the monk replied, "and it is not only hers." The monk sat cross-legged on the floor, facing the closed door, He placed a single incense stick in a small holder, but did not light it. "Incense is a marker," he said softly. "It tells spirits where grief has settled. This room has too many markers. Too many breaths." The smell of incense thickened in response, curling under the door, pressing against their ankles like fog. The monk began to chant. The words were slow, deliberate, heavy with age. Crit did not understand the language, but he felt its weight settle into the bones of the house. The walls creaked, the air vibrated. Inside the room, something stirred. The monk's chanting faltered, his breathing became strained. "They are listening," he said, "but they are not leaving." Sweat beaded on his brow. He pressed his palms together, fingers trembling. "This place has become a vessel," he continued. "The living breath has replaced fire. To end it, the vessel must be emptied." Crit's chest tightened. "How?" The monk opened his eyes slightly, just enough to glance at Crit. Never toward the door. "The breath must stop," he said. Silence swallowed the hallway. "Not death," the monk added quickly, "but release." He instructed Crit to enter the room alone at midnight, to kneel at the altar, to breathe out one final time, not for the room, not for the dead, but for himself. "And then leave," the monk said, "without looking back, without breathing in again until you cross the threshold." The monk stood with effort, leaning heavily on his staff. "If you fail," he warned, "the room will keep you, not as a ghost, but as a function." As the monk left, the smell of incense surged violently, rattling the door in its frame. From inside, something knocked once. Slow. Expectant. The room had heard everything. And it was ready.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 13. The village that began to leave. The village began to empty before anyone admitted why. At first, it was small things. Doors that stayed shut longer than usual. Shops that closed before sunset. People who avoided the road leading past the wooden house, choosing longer paths even under the midday sun. By the third day, the smell appeared outside. Not strong, not obvious, just enough to make people pause mid-step, wrinkle their noses, glance around in confusion. Incense, old, damp, unmistakable. It drifted along the alley at dawn. It clung to the air near the well. It settled briefly at the edges of the market, then vanished before anyone could point to its source. Animals sensed it first. Dogs refused to sleep near the house. Chickens scattered without warning, feathers exploding into the air as if something invisible had passed through them. At night, no insects sang near the end of the alley. Silence pooled there, thick and unnatural. Crit stayed inside. He felt the room changing, expanding beyond its walls, stretching its influence like a breath taken too deeply. The invisible altar no longer pulsed only at the center of his room. It echoed faintly through the hallway, the courtyard, the surrounding ground. The ritual was leaking. Neighbors began to leave. One family packed their belongings at midnight and drove away without turning on their headlights. Another abandoned their house entirely. Food still laid out on the table. Incense burned halfway down to ash, as if they had tried to appease something and failed. Whispers spread quickly, but never directly. The house is breathing again. The girl is not alone anymore. It's calling for help, but not ours. Crit watched from behind the curtains as the landlord sat alone in the courtyard. Day after day, staring at the hallway, she no longer spoke, she no longer prayed. The smell of incense clung to her clothes now. On the 7th night after the monk's visit, the pressure in the room intensified sharply. Crit felt it crawl up his spine, coil around his chest, tighten. The room wanted completion. Outside, engines roared as more villagers left, their headlights cutting briefly through the darkness before disappearing down the road. By dawn, half the houses stood empty. Crit understood then. The room was not expanding at random. It was being abandoned into power. The fewer witnesses remained, the stronger it became. The ritual thrived on silence, on absence, on the lack of interruption. By evening, only a handful of people were left, including Crit, the landlord, and the room. The smell of incense no longer drifted. It settled. And in that stillness, Crit realized the monk's warning had already begun to come true. If he did not act soon, There would be no village left to remember why the room should never have been allowed to breathe again. Chapter 14. The Man with the Lamp. He arrived after sunset, walking alone down the empty road. Crit noticed the light first. A steady yellow glow cut through the dusk, swaying gently with each step, refusing to flicker even when the wind picked up. It was not the harsh white of electricity, nor the trembling flame of a candle. It was the soft, patient light of an oil lamp, old-fashioned, deliberate. The man carrying it was thin, his posture bent slightly forward, as if accustomed to walking against resistance. He did not look afraid of the house. He did not hesitate at the gate. When he entered the courtyard, the smell of incense shifted. Not stronger. Different. Less suffocating. More respectful. "You shouldn't be here," Crit said, stepping out to confront him. His voice sounded strange in the open air, as if unused to being heard. The man nodded. "That's why I came." He introduced himself as Promote, a former caretaker of the house. Back when it still belonged to the dam workers. He had returned because the village had gone quiet, and quiet, he said, was never a good sign. Promote stopped at the hallway entrance and raised the lamp slightly. Its light did not reach the end of the corridor. It simply stopped, as if acknowledging a boundary. "This room was never meant to be sealed," Promote said. "Not like this." He explained that long ago. Before Sirin, the room had been used as a waiting space, a place where the dead were kept briefly before proper rites could be completed. The workers believed that spirits, like people, needed time to understand they had died. Incense was burned there not as worship, but as guidance. When Sirin was locked inside, Promote continued, the room remembered its purpose, but without rules. It began doing what it had always done, waiting. Only now, it waited too well. The lamp in Promote's hand was not for light. It was for direction, a flame that did not consume breath, a fire that asked nothing from the living. "I kept the lamp burning," he said softly, "until the house was sold. Then the room forgot the difference." From inside the hallway came a low, resonant hum, the sound of air moving through a narrow space. Breathing. The lamp flickered for the first time. Promote held it tighter. "The room doesn't want you," he said to Crit. "It wants continuity." He looked toward the door at the end of the hall. "And it will take whoever is closest." The smell of incense surged, sharp and urgent. From behind the closed door, something pressed once, firmly, against the wood. Not knocking. Claiming. Promote stepped forward, lifting the lamp high. "Tonight," he said, "we reminded how to let go." The light did not push back the darkness. It invited it to move on. And somewhere inside the sealed room, the breathing paused, just long enough to listen.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.
Chapter 15. The Incense in the Sealed Room. They entered the room just before midnight. Promote went first, holding the lamp steady, its flame calm and unwavering. Crit followed, every step feeling like a betrayal of his own lungs. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound, not a slam, not a lock, but an agreement. Inside, the air was thick. Not choking. Not violent. Patient. The invisible altar pulsed gently at the center of the room, no longer demanding, only waiting. The smell of incense was everywhere now. Warm and deep, like something that had burned for decades without ever being allowed to finish. Promote placed the lamp on the floor. For the first time, the room reacted differently. The incense did not surge. It hesitated. "This flame does not belong to you," Promote said softly, his voice steady. "It does not need breath. It does not need pain." The pressure shifted. Crit felt something loosen in his chest, just slightly, like fingers relaxing after holding on too long. Sirin appeared between them. Not kneeling. Standing. She looked smaller than Crit remembered. Less solid, her white clothing thin as mist. Her eyes were no longer empty. They were afraid, not of the room, but of leaving it. "This is all I know," she whispered. Promote bowed his head. "You were never meant to stay." The lamp's flame leaned forward, stretching unnaturally, its light touching the space where the altar had been. The smell of incense began to thin, not vanish, but fade, like smoke at the end of a long burn. Crit felt the pull one last time, gentle, pleading. He understood then what the monk had meant. Release was not escape. It was refusal. Crit took one final breath in the room, deep, full, deliberate. And then he let it out. Not as incense. Not as offering. But as himself. The air shuddered. The smell collapsed inward, folding into itself, thinning rapidly until only a faint trace remained. Sirin stepped back, her form dissolving into the lamp's glow, not consumed, but guided. When the flame straightened again, the room was quiet. Empty. Truly empty. They left without looking back. The next morning, sunlight poured through a new crack in the eastern wall, dust dancing in the air. The smell of incense was gone. The landlord passed away a month later, peacefully, a single unlit incense stick resting in her hand. The house was torn down soon after. But sometimes, rarely, people passing that empty lot say they catch a familiar scent. Not strong. Not burning. Just enough to remind them. Some rooms do not haunt. They wait. And some incense is never meant to be lit. Only finished. The smell of incense will fade. The room will disappear. But what was never released does not need walls or doors to remain. If one day you find yourself in a closed space and suddenly feel your chest grow heavy as a familiar scent fills the air, remember this: some incense does not need fire to burn, and some spirits are only waiting for one last breath from the living to finally leave.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.